But there's Gensler on video saying that, Joe Lubin bought 9.5% of the ICO.
Mm.
Right there, the documents themselves that Joe wrote says no speculative buying. And what I said before, you can't buy more than you can use. No way Joe could have justified 9.5%. And he was an officer of the company that issued the entity issuing the tokens themselves. And he goes ahead and breaks his own agreements.
This content is brought to you by Uphold, which is a great crypto platform that I've been using since 2018. Uphold has all the top cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, and all the altcoins. In fact, they have 260 plus cryptocurrencies on their platform. You can also trade precious metals, stable coins, and 37 fiat currencies. In addition, they are available in over 150 countries. And this platform is fully reserved. They do audits, so you can trust that your funds are safe, no commingling, no lending out your funds. If you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Steven Nerayoff, who's the creator of the utility token, the ICO, and the security token. Steven is also a VC and the co-founder of Ethereum. Steven, great to have you on.
Hi, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Steven, we've got a lot to talk about as it relates to Ethereum. There's so many layers to the story, your background as a co-founder, and what's happening today with what the SEC and Gary Gensler are trying to do. Maybe you can quickly recap the history of your role as a co-founder and where you first learned about Bitcoin and crypto and how that led to Ethereum.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Bitcoin was interesting because, going back to like my days in college, I got really interested in Ayn Rand and, what a lot of libertarians talk about, and the creature from Jekyll Island, and understood that this Federal Reserve thing was kind of like not really federal, and it was really, there was something wrong here, and so, that kind of just became a passion of mine. Monetary system. I spent many years as a, I wouldn't say gold bug, but very much involved in the gold
Mhm.
market. In fact, in 2008, I remember, I wasn't in the same position as like a John Paulson to get. The kind of deals he did, but I know I sold all my assets and went half cash and half gold before the 2008 crash. And Bitcoin, which actually really very much came out of that crash that took down so many people and foreclosed so many homes and did so much pain. And I think really changed an entire generation. So when Satoshi dropped, got actually dropped in my lap. And when I read it, it was really, I was like, this is only 9 pages. This was, um, I sat back and I spent like a couple hours really kind of going through it. And what kind of shocked me, I remember this really vividly. All these years I kind of was, with the narrative of, there's going to be this hyperinflation, and then there's going to be the civil unrest, and then, we're going to, like the German Weimar, went, barrels of cash and all of that kind of stuff, and, blood and potential war, and then here I am 30 years in technology. And I mean, I was running internet companies in Silicon Valley in the 90s. I've been a VC, and an entrepreneur since that time. And it's just ironic that the last place I expected, a solution for a new monetary system was in technology. And the person who gave it to me, I looked at them and I said, "Did you just hand me the new monetary system?" And so I started becoming very involved in the Bitcoin community. You can even like, on my Twitter account, you can look, I have a post there where I used to put the network statistics. It wasn't really about the price. It was so much about, like, how it was evolving, and it was more transactions and all of that. But the price was 32 cents, and like there was a December 2010 post. Um, And then fast forward about 3 years from there, again, it was right after Vitalik had published his white paper. And what happened was somebody, again, dropped it in my lap. And when I read it, that one actually came kind of clicked really quickly. I saw, this world computer, the EVM, what he was planning on doing. And I really saw the difference, starkly, because in my opinion, like Bitcoin is, a monetary, creation
Mm,
that, at least up until now was more of a one-trick pony where, value went back and forth. Of course, there's, a lot of development that's going on for Bitcoin for people that don't know, that's going to bring, the same capabilities, in various formats and L2s and different things. So there'll be a lot of functionality on Bitcoin. And ironically, a little known fact is that Vitalik originally attempted to put smart contracts onto Bitcoin.
mm,
But the Bitcoin core devs said they didn't want it to, I think the word was pollute, their little baby. So what I saw in Ethereum was an operating system,
mm.
similar to Windows, similar to Mac OS. Even your Xbox has one, and PS, whatever number it's up to right now. So to me, it was very much different. And this, I grasped the concept of the decentralized applications, or dApps. And so for those that don't understand, really, the genius of Satoshi, yeah, he solved a specific problem, and that had not been solved before. But really, practically speaking, what he was able to do was, for the first time in really history, he was able to, allow people, that weren't even next to each other, to interact
Mm.
without a middleman in the middle.
Right.
And that's really, and still have trust in the system. And you didn't have to have trust in the person you're dealing with. You didn't even need to know who that person was. And that is, I don't know, you look at our ability, the printing press, the wheel, I mean, it's kind of like it's up there with those types of inventions. And it was, everybody got close. We had DigiCash, and there was so many smart people that preceded him that he built on top, and then he was able to solve this one problem. Hal Finney was able to program it, and I don't know if any one of them ever actually anticipated it to be as large as it is. So what happened with Ethereum was, they wanted to do a crowd sale. Technically, it was the fourth crowd sale ever to have been engaged. When a crowd sale is, you're selling, this thing, and in this case, it's called Ether, to the public in general. And they went to, I believe they had spoken to the SEC, but they had spoken to, um, untold number of white shoe, large law firms, and every one of them said, what you're attempting to do is an unregistered sale of securities. You need to register it with the SEC. This is a security, and they just really had no creativity or answer behind it.
Mm.
I spoke to them and then went and met with them, and this was really early on, and like this.
How, how did you end up meeting them, by the way?
It was, yeah, it was interesting because, I got tickets for me and these two guys that worked with me, and as we are getting prepared to go down to the airport for the Miami Bitcoin conference, where Vitalik was going to actually present, the Ethereum white paper, to really a packed audience. And I had a family emergency, so I ended up not going. But I was already packed. But I sent them along. And
Mm.
and one of them is actually in that famous picture at the Miami house, for anybody who's seen it. And when they were talking about this, and they were saying they can't solve this problem, so they don't know how to move forward. This guy that worked for me, said, yeah, my boss can figure this out.
Mm.
And so I was, flattered that he thought I could figure out what no attorney in the country could figure out. But immediately right after that, while they were in Miami, I'm pretty sure it was Charles reached out to me and said, hey, I spoke to, this guy that works for you, and he said you can help, you can fix this. Can you come up and meet with us? And so we started talking, and I went up and met with them. And when I met with them, it was now I met with, pretty much the team. And so it was, the team was still gelling, and this was December 2013 into January 2014. This was the first month that it was starting. And I officially, I think, started in January 14. But, it was Joe, it was Vitalik, it was Charles, it was Anthony DeLorio, who's, unsung in many ways because he was, he housed it and really was pushing it and put a lot of the early funding lent, basically lent money to the enterprise. So, and he's a good friend. And so I went there and I was, listening and I talked to them and what they said to me is, this is what we've been told by everybody. Your guy says you could do this.
Mm.
And it's interesting because I told this story to Camilla Russo for her book. And for anybody who hasn't read it, it's an excellent, excellent book. It's called The Infinite Machine. It's a history of what happened back there. And I said, yeah, I can do this. And they said, how? And I said, I have no effing idea. And so they all kind of looked at me like I was just like, just nuts. I was crazy, right? And I sounded crazy. And to be fair, I didn't have any idea how I was going to solve it. What I did know was this. I'm a lawyer by training. Okay.
Mm.
I did what's called structured finance. And so without getting into the specifics of that, to me, I looked at tokens and things that in structured finance are tranches. There were different levels of payouts, for different assets that you like break up, kind of like tokenization.
Mm.
And also had a tax background, had a degree, advanced degree in tax. And believe it or not, that actually it's, tax is not and the lawyers is like you don't have a calculator even. It's more like figuring out these Byzantine puzzle kind of stuff. So that coupled with 30 years of understanding technology,
Mm.
am I a coder? No. Am I a cryptographer? No. Um, but do I understand the underlying technology? Did I understand how and why Bitcoin worked? And did I understand how and why Ethereum was working? Yes. Could I have programmed it? No. But that was a good thing because I guess the best way I could say it is I was coming at this from a very unusual angle. I wasn't the smartest lawyer in the space. I certainly wasn't the smartest technologist in the space. But I did have more experience than most everybody,
Mm.
almost everybody. So what that meant was I had seen cycles before. And things, don't repeat, but they certainly rhyme. And so it was kind of like, I guess the best way to say is I had a certain angle that I was able to see this. And that was what was allowed me to create, I can go briefly into it, but the utility token, the ICO, eventually the security token as well. And it was due to that.
So tell us about the next steps for the launch and you bringing that idea to the table. Like, here's how we could launch this token. Everybody's afraid of the security aspect, right? How did the idea of the ICO come up?
Yeah, so I mean, you have to first look at the token itself, and actually, we ran a bar, and I was sitting with Vitalik. I believe I had a drink, and he was 19. I think he had a Coke, and it was we were still getting our hands around what this thing Ether is, right? And I said, so let me get this straight. Like and this is like really, really how I was speaking. I was like, so you need to have this stuff to send this stuff. And he said, Ether? I said, yeah, Ether, right? You need to have it, right, to send it. He said, yes. And I'm like, okay. And then you've got these decentralized applications, and they're like, hungry monsters, right? And they need to be fed. And so you need to feed them with this ether to make them work. Like, and he said, is that correct? And he said, yeah, that's correct. So I said, well, and I used a couple analogies. I said, when you send a letter, you need to put a stamp on that letter, right? And nobody would say that that stamp, that one stamp, I'm not talking about a collector's stamp or something like that, but the current stamp sold by, in this case, the United States Post Office, but in other countries, nobody would consider that to be a security. I also used, I said, aside from this being fuel on the actual protocol, I said this, really feels like fuel, like that you would put in your car.
Mm.
And but that could depend. So if I'm filling up my car, with 10 or 20 gallons of fuel, nobody would say that I just bought a security. If I have buy a million barrels of gasoline, and unless I'm like American Airlines, that very well may be a security. So first, what we came up with was this I called it a functional token, and then it evolved into what's called a utility token. But the point was, I was saying this is a product, and it looks and feels like a product, and so long as we treat it properly before we actually sell it, which that process became the ICO, but this is a utility token concept. So once we evolved, and cemented that this is a product, now we have to figure out, okay, this utility token that we're now calling it, how do we now sell this where it doesn't come back and become a security? And that was, kind of a little like, I wanted to rip my hair out because what you're doing is you're trying to figure out every possible way that, what could possibly go wrong and in terms of that sales process to the public, and that would turn this product back into security. So one example that I was using earlier is the volume. If somebody's buying more of this product than they could justify using for themselves, well, then there's probably a profit motive in there.
Mm.
And for those that don't know, at least in the United States, there's a thing called the Howey test, and it's a four-pronged test. And so, without going on to the specifics, it's like making money off of the efforts of others and so forth, and it's a common enterprise and what have you. But really, like when it comes down to it, comes down to, is there a profit motive or isn't there a profit motive?
Right.
The entity selling this thing, did they intend for people to make money? People buying it, were they, did they believe that they were buying this through messaging or whatever, that it was something that was going to go up in value, or did they believe this is something that they were going to use? And so one of the things I put in there, I put a very specific limit, and I said, we can't sell more than this amount to any one individual buyer. There were certainly other aspects of it, and so I listed all of these, and then I just kind of put them in some kind of order, and I said, guys, here's what we need to do. And I showed it. Fortunately, I will say, give a shout out to, Joe Grunfest, who's probably the most illustrious head of the chairman of the chairman of the SEC in the last 75 years. And he's a law professor at Stanford Law School. And I worked with him on almost a daily basis, and he was
Wow.
really up to date. He understood what Ether was. And when I went to him initially with this product narrative that became the utility token, at first I thought he was going to say that's the dumbest idea I ever heard, and he said, "No, no, that's brilliant. That really could work." Which I'm like, wait, we're on to something here. And then I worked with him, and I said, what if somebody does this? Could it turn into security? What if somebody does that? And so it was a great sound. I mean, like maybe the greatest sounding board, on the planet that I could have, had. And I think the industry owes a huge debt to him. And I would say also when the Ripple lawsuit happened, he became an unpaid advisor to Ripple and
Right.
actually did something kind of unprecedented. He sent a letter to Jay Clayton, an old a former SEC chairman sending it to a current SEC chairman, like that's not protocol. That's not usual. And he said you should not be um, taking an enforcement action against Ripple, and he said a bunch more, but it was pretty harshly worded letter.
Hmm. Yeah, I had Joseph on the podcast and we had talked a bit about this. And that was surprising that that letter went out. To your point, not typical for former SEC officials to do that. Um, so tell us about, with the idea and you use Joe as a sounding board and you got the process up and running. What can you tell us about who participated in that ICO? I've seen names, but I can't validate that. Maybe you can. I don't know if you can name drop or it's not appropriate, but what can you tell us there?
So, I mean, it's, there's two sets. So there was about 60 million Ether that were sold
Mm,
in the ICO, that were sold supposedly to purchasers of Ether. Then there was, I had come up with this, we had come up with this formulation that approximately 30%, and it came out to like almost 12 million, it was about 11,900,000 Ether that were given to contributors. So people like myself and other co-founders and what have you that participated. Um,
mm,
that's part of the Ether that I actually turned down and did not accept. And I'd say, between that and the reason I didn't accept that, I also withdrew the investment I was going to make the night before, and I also had a very large amount of expenses because I rented an office for them. Vitalik stayed with me. I basically paid all of their expenses, so they didn't have a nexus, which is a connection to the United States.
mm,
And I did that for the good of the project because there would be no conflict of interest. And frankly, if the SEC came after anybody, and these are ominous thoughts, down looking in hindsight, they would come after me. And I was clean, so I didn't think they would, anything would happen, but it would be protecting the project. I came to about 1 million ETH, which is like, north of $3 billion today. I don't regret it at all. I'm actually
wow.
super happy that I did it. But the I think so. You break it into these but two buckets. The one bucket, the ones that were given out to contributors, I actually have the list. I haven't published that list, and that's like how much did Vitalik get? How much did Joe Lubin get? There's some, so not how much did they purchase, but given for their efforts.
So,
Um, I didn't publish that list for a reason. Is that there's a lot of well-intentioned people. There's probably under 100 people, but and why put a target on somebody's back? Letting the world know that they've got $200 million in Ether. Maybe they have it, maybe they don't still have it, but
mm,
it's putting people's lives in danger. So that's why I didn't put it out there per se. But what it did do is it helped people that were doing online evaluations and saying, okay, well, these wallets got this amount of Ether, these wallets got this amount of Ether, and in some case, perhaps they could attach that to a person or an entity, and in some cases they couldn't, but they knew that the wallets were connected. I think in Joe's case, it was, that list probably was helpful
mm,
in terms of identifying, a particular wallet, which then was connected to all these other wallets. And so, so to the extent that that's the case, it's really two different parts. That doesn't take away anything from, still figuring out what all those wallets were in the first place, and that's kind of some on-chain analysis, and there's a skill in that, and that's its own thing. But then once you have that, you have to definitively somehow prove, and having this list, and it wasn't the only one thing that I had, but would actually prove it. What do I believe? My belief is that the majority of the ICO. and this was in a way, this was telegraphed. I missed this video. And I guess, I should have been in class that day because this was not a video that you wanted to miss. And this is Joe's Hidden Whales video, right?
Mm.
And so for the life of me, I don't understand if you're, I guess, people who are about to commit a criminal act, usually they speak after and brag, and that's how they end up getting caught. This one, like, spoke beforehand. So, I don't know, I can't get into Joe's head. I don't want to get into Joe's head. It's probably scary being in Joe's head. But he actually had a video where he said, if you don't want to scare people, and you want to buy a large amount of ether, so you take it and you break it up into, like, hundreds or whatever wallets. I only saw this because thankfully, this XRP army, because of the Ripple litigation, did this decentralized justice and found these videos. They found the videos of me that I didn't even have.
Right.
And he was kind of like, whoa. And I looked at this, I said, is this for real? Like, is he really saying this? And he's giving this advice to people and it's on camera? And the whole point of, going before, and I said limiting the number that you could purchase, he's literally telling people, without saying it so much, hey, Steve figured out a way for us to do this totally legally, but if you want to kind of circumvent it, and for people and not to realize it, here's a way to do it. You create different entities and you put it into different wallets. And, a problem with that is, you can probably still figure out and attach those. They've given us enough, breadcrumbs, so to speak, to kind of figure that out. So I believe that Joe was a significant. Gary Gensler said he bought, well, I would say Joe said, I've never owned recently at a conference. They said something about or he said, I've never owned even close to 0.5%.
Mm.
I'm paraphrasing, but the even close to was the key component. And kind of everybody said, oh, he's never owned more than 0.5%. I said, that's not what he said. He said, I've never owned even close to 0.5%. 40% is not close to 0.5%. Everybody else realized the thought, he was talking about 0.1%,
Yeah.
right? But Joe's really careful with his words, and that was a slick statement. The other player that I believe, and I saw them at the time, I just didn't really quite understand, what, the um, uh, let's say the history of these entities, and that's the CCP affiliated when I'm going to mispronounce it, but Wanshang of Wanxiang. Apologies for my Chinese friends, in America and otherwise that I mispronounce. But there's a CCP, a very closely affiliated CCP entity.
Mm.
They had a couple of subsidiaries who I knew well and have known well and had no reason to believe they were doing anything. I've done deals with them, didn't think anything of it. One of them was Fenbushi, run by Bo Shen. I'm not making any another was Hashkey. I'm not making any allegations against either of these subsidiaries. I have nothing to show any illicit activities other than the fact that they just are subsidiaries of this larger Wansheng.
Mm.
And I believe they were a very, large purchaser in the ICO. Um, yes, those two, and then some Ethereum co-founders themselves.
Mm. Now, there were reports over the years that JPMorgan was invested in Consensus, a lot of transactions, even JPMorgan forking the Ethereum blockchain, creating Quorum, a private version. They launched JPM Coin. Was JP Morgan in any way involved in the ICO, or is it that comes later with Consensus?
And so Joe says that JP Morgan was involved prior to mainnet launch.
Hmm.
I was around, most everybody kind of scattered. It was my understanding that there was a vesting agreement, for X number of years for people to vest their ether, and Joe took it upon himself to do the terms of sale, the product purchase agreement, and he was chief operating officer of the token issuing entity,
Mm,
which means, he actually wrote the documents. And I dropped a 3-hour talk with Vitalik and an NFT, and if you go to my Twitter at Stephen Nerayoff, you'll see it's my pinned tweet. And in there, Vitalik asked me, they were running out of money, and I gave him, it was a 3-month McKinsey style, research into every aspect of the company. And I had really set up, most of those, or reviewed, human resources, finance, the list goes on and on. And one of those I said, Joe removed the vesting agreement. So everybody kind of like had no incentive to stay. And that
mm,
was one of the things I said to him. I said, your only incentive is to promote the price of Ether, but not to promote Ethereum as a protocol and create dApps, which was the whole idea.
mm,
Um, to be fair, I don't currently have any recollection
mm,
of JPMorgan being involved. I did start consensus with Joe.
mm,
On the other hand, I take pretty copious notes on what my daily activities are, and I also keep a pretty good calendar. I did not recall that we had a conference call with the Federal Reserve in October of 2014 either, until I saw it, and then it kind of started coming back to me. So was it possible? I know there was. And this is in Camila Russo's book. Vitalik used to stay with me on and off throughout that whole year, even though he said he only met me a few times in early 2014. And I do recall that on our Slack boards, there was a lot of veiled comments about the banks infiltrating us and JP Morgan. It was actually, they were mostly, if I remember, it was focused on Goldman Sachs, which was where supposedly Joe had worked previously. And Vitalik came in, and I said, and I called him V, and I said, "Yo, V, check this out." And I'm like, they're like, they seem to be making clear references to Joe as being a plant by the banks
mm,
uh, to take over Ethereum. And Vitalik turned red, and this isn't Camila Russo's book, and he went and he wrote, and he says, we're user agnostic, and if banks want to use it, that's just great. And if, whoever wants to use it, that's fine. And I was like, that's cool. That was good that you did that. And then I'm like, Joe being a plant for the banks, this is like nuts. And like, I think I got that one wrong. So, it's, takes a big man to make admit his errors, and there were some people on there that were clearly more tuned in, and it was ironic because I'm a fairly astute person, right? And I rented an office. I had my office for my artificial intelligence company, and that's what I was actually doing prior to Bitcoin, disrupting my life. And then I rented a second office. There was like 3 offices right next to it. I rented a second office for Ethereum. I paid for it, did not get reimbursed. And then I opened up a third office, which became Consensus.
mm,
I was involved in all of those. And again, it was really to try to kind of protect the project. But the point was that I was with Joe almost on a daily basis throughout this whole time. During the crowd sale, almost 42 days. I don't know how many out of those 40 days, but most of those 42 days, Joe and I were sitting in the same room as the crowd sale was proceeding. Um, I will say this, in terms of who participated, uh, uh, Preston Byrne put out a chart, um, kind of a logarithmic chart that just shows this like perfect, systematic, consistent flow of funds into the ICO. Now, for somebody who's not only invented the ICO, but has probably participated and created more ICOs than anybody, um, Preston made a a comment in there, and his point was, this is so inorganic. This is so unnatural
Mm.
that um, I think if I want, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he was basically saying this looks like this was purchased up by, one, two, three small entity, one, two, or three small number of entities took down, the vast majority of the ICO. I'm in agreement with him. I mean, the chart kind of speaks volumes because no ICO chart that I've ever seen works like that. If an ICO is hot, you see a huge spike, then, especially because in the early weeks, you got, I think it was almost twice as much ether per Bitcoin than you did at the end. So why would you wait? Unless you were buying up, you know, 80 or 90% of it, then it really didn't matter when you were putting it in because, the point was you owned the same amount anyway. So, it's better that it doesn't look like, and if you did buy 80 or 90%, because it was an uncapped sale, so you could have gone to, we raised 18 million, you could have gone to 18, 180 million. So I don't think they wanted to tip off anybody. It looks like that. And so they would consistently buying, consistently buying, consistently buying throughout the whole, and that's just not normal.
So where did your relationship with the Ethereum folks, Vitalik, Joe Lubin, go sour, where criminal extortion charges were brought against you and, of course, eventually dropped and dismissed? What happened there?
Yeah, so interesting. So we would have to take a whole another podcast just to talk about the number of coincidences. I use that word with like triple quotes, between my false prosecution, which we proved was based on fabricated evidence that the government fabricated with their own documents from their own records. But what's interesting is I was falsely arrested in September of 2019.
Mhm.
But let's go back to May of 2017. Three things interesting happened. Um, Bill Hinman arrived at the SEC that very month. Also, that very month, the company that falsely accused me, and when I say when I proved falsely, not only the government documents, the extortion that they claimed happened, what they didn't realize, it was on a Skype video call. I had recorded that entire 2.5 hour conversation. So it's kind of like saying, somebody committed a murder in New York, but you've got them on videotape in Chicago and you're still charging them.
Mm.
The third thing that happened was there was an article that was posted that involved other Ethereum co-founders, and it was basically talking about whether or not this porn um, project had come out, and they were asking. It was a very serious question, and it was from Coin Idol magazine, and they were saying, is this harmful to Ethereum? And we all basically had the same opinion. We said, no. I mean, porn, VHS and a lot of, they tend to be at the forefront of technology. Take away the content, it's just, that's, it's almost a compliment. If organized, it just sounds weird, but it's historically true.
Right.
But it's not to condone it in any way, but organized crime and pornography, you can look at those and you can almost see, that's where the technology trends are going to go because they need to do it for their illicit purposes.
Right.
I even said in that article that I'm not saying this on behalf of the Ethereum. I'm saying this is my personal opinion, right? And the we had agreed, Vitalik and I had agreed to call myself a founding advisor. The Ethereum Foundation, and this was the beginning of a massive coordinated multi-year discrediting campaign to erase me and to discredit all my activities from Ethereum prior to any prosecution. And that's really important. The Ethereum Foundation sent an email saying that, he was never involved, Steve was never involved in this project. And, I had a couple of people from Ethereum chime in and say, no, Steve really was involved. And then they said, okay, well, fine, but you got to take out his title and don't point him to ethereum.org, point him to the Wikipedia. And they erased me from ethereum.org. So this was just the beginning Vitalik saying he only met me a few times. Well, if anybody looks at that in early 2014, the recording I dropped was in early 2015. It's a 3 hour conversation. You tell me who knows what's going on in there and who's a clueless idiot in terms of what's happening with Ethereum versus me and Vitalik. And I'll go on record as saying that what is this? Yeah, he's a human calculator, but what the hell has he actually invented? Nothing. He didn't create smart contracts. He hasn't gotten the damn thing to scale. It was supposed to scale in 2016. He hasn't gotten it to scale. And so, I think he's done an extreme amount of harm. But, that started the let's discredit Steve so nobody will pay attention. And unfortunately, I wasn't the type to going around and, blasting everything that I did the way these guys are blasting things they didn't even do. So
But Steve, why? Why were they trying to do that? Is it because of the ICO aspect? They were trying to distance themselves from that?
no, they were trying to distance me. And it took me some time to figure this out. It wasn't until I had some ideas, but really, the Hinman emails really solidified it for me.
Mm.
And then I started going through my thousands of documents. I mean, I have more documents of Ethereum than anybody else. And I realized the free pass that Bill Hinman gave that said Ethereum is now decentralized and therefore doesn't need to be regulated as security, and therefore I guess it's a commodity or whatever. I had documentation actually signed by Vitalik that said that Ethereum was not decentralized. I'm paraphrasing it here. I've put it up, and it's on my Twitter account, that it's not decentralized and they need to issue um, basically the same number, that's 60 million Ether, within the next 3 years, 4 months, which is right around the time of the Hinman speech. They had issued less than half of that. So according to the internal documents of Ethereum, Vitalik and Joe Lubin knew that they had not been decentralized. However, both of them went in to meet with Hinman under oath.
Mm.
That's 1,001, it's a felony to lie. And there's no way they could have told Hinman because then he couldn't have made that speech. I'm not for 1 second going to defend Hinman because I can't prove this, but it's hard to imagine that he didn't know about this. But evidence needs to prove that one out. What I can say is that the email that had that document effectively was sent to from the lawyer Jeff Alberts, who was in the meeting. Doesn't sound like he said anything. Whether that's a criminal conduct or not, needs to be seen. Was sent from him to me, to Joe and Vitalik. There were only two other people that even knew this document existed, and I can tell you those two people had no clue what was in this document. They didn't understand the legalese. They didn't send any of it. I think one signed it, and the other one, I doubt he even read it. So really, the only person who was, let's say, not on the inside that knew this document existed was me.
Mm.
So they needed to discredit me. I think they thought that the false prosecution would end. So if people understand that when you're indicted by the federal government, there's
Mm.
no statistics for getting that indictment dropped because it's, pretty close to being a unicorn. It's that rare. Years will go, without any federal indictments getting dismissed. I got mine dismissed with prejudice. That's how rare that is. But the discrediting campaign was if I went out and spoke, they could say, "Oh, he's just." Even there was an article that came out right afterwards and said, instead of saying this is monumental, including me getting a list of all the OGs in the space who they wanted me to cooperate and turn on, which I never did. I refused. I told them to go bleep themselves. I said, I'll never cooperate with you because I think it's a witch hunt.
Mm.
Instead of going into all of that, they kind of muddy me up and make it sound like, I have loss of credibility.
Mm.
So this campaign is far and wide.
So, but what I'm, Stephen, and I apologize if I miss this, but what I'm trying to figure is why they are trying to discredit you? Is it simply because of the document, or you guys had differences? The relationship just went bad, or you didn't go along with something they wanted to do? What took place there?
No, I think that no, they did something illegal.
Mm.
I was able to blow the whistle on that.
Ah.
And I also knew something else that was really important. Um, when I left Ethereum, I basically, you know, I would have ended up having a million ether, right? When Joe and I were starting Consensus, at some point I decided I did not want to work with Joe. And I just said, look, whatever my percentage is, we were arguing between 25 and 50%, whatever. The point is, I said, here, it's yours. I don't want any claim on Consensus. You could have it. And so, here's a guy. I'm not saying I'm the only person that knows about a lot of the illicit activity that they did, but a lot of people are on the payroll, so to speak. They knew, um, I guess I take it as a compliment that they could not buy me. And it was a smart move, actually, because had they tried to come and said, here's $10 billion, just keep your mouth shut. I mean, the first thing I would have done is, kind of gone to the authorities. So, they had to silence me somehow. So we
Mm.
didn't have a falling out. No, we had no issues. I didn't even realize that this stuff had happened. And to be fair, at the time that it was happening, I didn't know what I knew. I didn't know what they had done. So
Mm.
at the very beginning, I didn't know that I was a whistleblower. It wasn't until they came after me and then I started researching it that I realized why they had come after me.
Mm. So let's talk about Hinman. It's been publicly documented through Empower Oversight, getting FOIA requests and emails, through the Ripple lawsuit as well, that Hinman was warned by the SEC ethics office. You're not supposed to be talking to these folks and so forth, right? Simpson Thatcher was part of the Enterprise Elite Ethereum Alliance. Is it, as it seems on its face, that the reason Hinman was so-called compromised is because maybe his law firm that he's getting paid by had a vested interest?
I, you know, to me, it's actually much, much deeper than that. All of that's true. And the conflicts of interest and the warnings he received and just ignored are mind-boggling, absolutely mind-boggling. And supposedly the SEC Inspector General is looking at it. I don't know how much I hope we put into that, but there's something else I would say. As I mentioned earlier, Hinman got there at May to the SEC at May of 2017.
Mm.
Okay, the discrediting campaign against me started also in May of 2017.
Mm.
The company that was a setup that ended up falsely accusing me of extortion, I got introduced to in May of 2017. Empower Oversight's FOIA requests all start from the date of May of 2017.
Mm.
So if Hinman, this is just kind of like logic. I don't have a document stating this yet, but the SEC inexplicably has 14 gigabytes of data on me, even though supposedly, according to them and the DOJ, they weren't involved in my prosecution. What I can say is all of this happening at the same time means it had to have been pre-planned,
Mm.
which means it had to predate Hinman getting there. So my very strong belief, based on all these facts, it's their inferences. So I want to be clear about that. I don't what do you call me conspiracy theory there, but they're very logical inferences, and we will get to discovery through my lawsuit.
Mm.
Uh, is that Hinman and Clayton were actually sent to the SEC for this primarily this very specific purpose to give monopolization halo and favoritism to Ethereum over all other crypto.
Mm. Wow. But and this may be a tough question to answer, because if that's the case, right? Let's say that they were sent there to get this going, and we see some of the things that played out, the lawsuit against Ripple and so forth. Who's the head of the snake here? Who's spearheading this, I guess is my question, to coordinate all of that?
Wow. some of those cartoons you see like a snake with many heads.
Medusa or something. Yeah.
So um, there's certainly snakes in here. And well, what I can say is this. If you back up for a second and zoom out, you know, why is the SEC from Clayton and Hinman in one administration giving favoritism to an entity that appears to be controlled by a CCP affiliated company? And then fast forward to Gensler doing exactly the same thing with Prometheum,
Hmm. Yeah.
controlled by very publicly by the same CCP affiliated entity. That's a scary thought, right? So, like, is has the CCP infiltrated our administrative state and higher? I don't know. I can't answer that definitively. What I can say is, well, there were, I helped architect T0. That was the first security token on the first security token exchange. Yet this license that was given, technically by FINRA, but which is, effectively reports to the SEC,
Right.
by Gensler, was given to a company not only that was controlled by the CCP entity, but that has no product, no technology, like kind of nothing. And it looks like, snake oil. And yet you've got a company that in T0, which is now owned by the New York Stock Exchange, ICE, International Continental Exchange, and he doesn't give it to them. An American, you know, large, 100+ billion-dollar market cap, New York Stock Exchange. They own the New York Stock Exchange, but they're also listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Doesn't give it to them. And there's a list of other companies were looking for this magic bullet license, so to speak.
Right.
Um, it's also telling about how he's using that.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I spoke to Aaron Kaplan at Prometheum, and he's echoing Gensler's statements about all these things are digital asset securities, that terminology that Gensler's been using. And they're viewing Ethereum as a security, and they're happy and proud of their license. Like we get to custody first digital asset security, which is Ethereum, and straight from the horse's mouth, right? So something fishy is going on there. Um, so the billion-dollar question for you, given the plethora of experience, you helping to set up the ICO, was Ethereum a security at the ICO launch, and is it a security today? Hi, everyone. Pardon the interruption. I'm Tony Edward, the founder and host of the Thinking Crypto podcast. I have a huge favor to ask you. If you haven't subscribed as yet on YouTube or the podcast platforms, hit that subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button, hit the notification bell on the YouTube platform, and on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts, please leave a 5-star rating and review. It supports the podcast. It allows me to bring great quality content to you. Thank you for your support, and I'll let you get back to the content.
Yes and yes. Not because of anything that I did. I mean, I set it up properly. Had they followed my guidelines, they could have at least mitigated or potentially prevented it. There's some argument about using the funds to actually build out the network. But that being said, Hinman says putting aside basically the ICO, all of this other stuff, we're going to bless them anyway. But there's Gensler on video saying that, Joe Lubin bought 9.5% of the ICO.
Mm.
Right there, the documents themselves that Joe wrote says no speculative buying. And what I said before, you can't buy more than you can use. No way Joe could have justified 9.5%. And he was an officer of the company that issued the entity issuing the tokens themselves. And he goes ahead and breaks his own agreements. And the night before, a day or two before the crowd started, Joe had changed the language to say, discourage prohibited sell, speculative buying, and then lawyers changed that to say prohibited. So, it just kind of looked like Joe was leaving room there, wiggle room to do this. But Gensler is saying that there was speculative buying.
Mhm.
If you have speculative buying, and it's by an officer of the issuing entity. How do you not trip the Howey test right there,
Mhm.
right? And he's on, on a film, at MIT stating this. Why does he know this, by the way? That's another question. Like, why do you know this?
Right.
Gary, please, any question? Any answers? No,
It-
respond. In any
so,
event, the point is,
uh,
he, why hasn't he gone after them since? He had the audacity to call XRP a security prior to ever getting to the SEC and then prosecute, the enforcement action. Even more egregious is against Chris and Brad, which is kind of like just unprecedented. But yet, by his own words, Ethereum would have been a security, and he didn't do anything, towards that end.
mm,
I think what you're seeing here is, you know, uh, I posted something to this effect recently. In 2018, Hinman gave them the free pass speech. And, for those of you who know that in Monopoly, there's the get out of jail card free. And so what Gensler appears to be doing is give that card to everybody involved, including himself, prior SEC officials, actors such as Lubin and Vitalik, other entities such as JPMorgan and the CCP affiliated entities, a get out of jail card, get out of jail free card. And what that means is he's using the merge when they went from proof of stake in 2022. It's like, okay, now it turned into a security.
mm,
Okay, Mr. Gensler, you said it was a security basically in 2015, 2014, 2015. So it's a security again, and so you're just going to use this one. I mean, what that does is it says, okay, we don't have to worry about anything before 2022 because
mm,
we don't want to worry about anything between 2022. So it's like, yeah, if you create, a massive criminal activity on a scale of RICO and unprecedented, where Enron and Madoff are like barely rounding decimal errors, and you want to just kind of cover that all up, there's so many points in which Ether was treated as a security. Let's just pick the latest one in time, and we'll cover the rest up. In the meantime, we gave this license to Prometheum.
mm,
How coincidental. And Prometheum can then use it on their alternative trading system, and trade it as a security. And the interesting thing is, it may not have been everything they had wanted previously to monopolize all of crypto. And
mm,
I hope my presence and the receipts that I produced help prevent that. But what the banks want to do, and I'm not implicating BlackRock at all, but I'm just saying BlackRock has talked about they want to do this. I believe, maybe JP Morgan and everything, especially with what you're talking about with Quorum, they can start tokenizing real world assets.
mm,
That's the first security token that I had done. And you can do that if Ethereum's a security, right? And as you can do it, we actually did the first, it's called T0P for T0. We
right.
launched on Ethereum as well. So they may still be able to, may not be able to monopolize crypto per se, but they may be able to monopolize a market that arguably is bigger than crypto
Mm,
using a clearly defective product that has skirted all the laws and has received all kinds of favoritism and now is just trying to get brushed under the rug. I don't think it will.
mm,
I'm pretty optimistic that it won't. There's too many players involved. I'm bringing a lot of receipts to the table. It's not usual where you've got somebody, they call me a whistleblower. I'm really not a whistleblower. Look, I mean, I think I've arguably I've been, invented more in this space than most. And I just happened to be at the right place at the right time because of what I was creating. And I'd like to think that I have some ethics. So whatever risks I have to take, when I was in the depths of my prosecution, I made a commitment to myself. I said, when I get out of here, I'm going to tell the world about what I saw, what happened, and I'm going to do everything I can to hold those people accountable.
Mm.
There seems to be a race here. They seem to be in a rush to now all of a sudden, oh, let's call it a security, but we're going to call it a security, give it to Prometheum, which will still allow all of our friends on Wall Street to kind of take this over. And if you also listen to another one of Gensler's speeches, he talks about specifically how the incumbents can take over a disruptive technology
Yeah.
uh, to them. They kind of draw it out, which is what the SEC's done, given no guidance, for over a dozen years or plus, and then eventually kind of, take over the industry. And so, in large part, that's exactly the playbook that he said on camera is exactly what's playing out.
Stephen, I hope you don't mind me asking you this. And it's a genuine question because I think about myself being in your position with all the receipts that you have, and they've already done things to try to stop you. Are you ever like in fear of your life that, look, man, I might be in danger here because who is involved and all so many layers, government, private industry, Wall Street, and so forth?
So I'm not a daredevil, right? It's not. Um, I'm a truth slayer, right? And I expose non-truths. It's who I am, so I very much believe in die free, or
Mm.
exactly how they say the phrase, but live free or die. I think is I have no intention of dying. I've heard the phrase, I'm willing to die on this hill. I am willing to die on this hill, but I'm not going to die on this hill.
Mm.
Uh, I made it clear to them, and they understand what this means, is that there's far, far more detrimental evidence that I have that I could expose. Those have been put into, let's say it's decentralized, put into a lot of other hands that if anything were to happen, they would be exposed. So I did cover myself. Do I
Mm.
spend my time worrying about it every day? No. I mean, I guess, maybe there's a spiritual component of me that,
Right.
if you think about that, you kind of attract what you think.
Sure.
And so I just kind of put it out of my head. Do I lock my door? Yeah, I do, but do I have security, guards around me or anything like that? No. I mean, the reality is if a state wants to take you out, and they were able to, they would, unless they think that taking you out is much more detrimental, they're going to suffer some damage.
Mm.
Uh, will they still survive as an entity? Yeah, probably. But they need to have more transparency and accountability. Some of the other stuff that I could drop out, um, I would put their status in real jeopardy.
Mm.
And, and frankly, I don't not do that because I don't want to expose them. I don't not do that even because of my own safety. I'm not sure that, the society is ready for some of that, and I'm not sure that it would actually be beneficial on a net, basis. But it is in other hands, who can make that decision when the time comes. Right now, I have a very tailored focus. I need to focus on this. This is multiple unprecedented events.
Mm.
And how do we get this across to the world population? Remember, this is not something that happened to the US, even though the US was complicit in it. This is a fraud against the world. It's an attempt to take over the monetary system and the financial systems of the globe. Right. So this is something that's happened to countries, that is happening and should be outraged in Europe, even parts of Asia and South America. And You're seeing what's, happening in South America. They're buying their Bitcoin, and they're getting wise to all of this. So, at the end of the day, hopefully, I've got my angels and my army behind me too, protecting us.
For
And
sure.
I would like to say this, that for those of you people that think it's these huge, countries, and and it's true, they are, and they're to be appropriately respected, but not feared. Everybody told me that you can't beat the feds. I had multiple agencies. The first time anybody ever proved that multiple agency coordinated over dozens of people to fabricate a crime against an innocent person, knowing the person was innocent. And I proved that. That's
Mm,
unprecedented, right? And I did that because while I had a healthy respect for, the federal government, at no point did I ever fear them
mm,
or could ever let them get into our minds. And I think as a society, it's really important that we close off our minds and say, no, the propaganda that we're being given, what we're being shown on the news, the things that they're telling us, we need to, like, shows like yours are key, where you're bringing the truth out. And people in their bones, when you get goosebumps, you're hearing the truth, right? And when you're not, when you're being fed um aligned.
mm. I think you got a book to write there, man. But with that, what beating the feds and these agencies and so forth. Um, but I want to go back to Hinman for a second. Um, when Hinman gave that free speech, was the thesis that he used that a blockchain, right? Forget about maybe Ethereum for a second, can be centralized, but then eventually morph to become more decentralized based on maybe nodes and so forth. And I know Hester Peirce at the SEC, who's been pro crypto, has put out some, literature about that. So was Hinman's thesis valid, but like we were talking about, not entirely accurate for Ethereum because of all the details we've discussed?
No, I don't think it was ever valid.
Mm,
No, I mean it was not decentralized. He actually said two things. He said, similar, to he said that Bitcoin was decentralized perhaps from the beginning.
mm,
That's directly contradicted in the Ethereum opinion letter that Vitalik signed. Let me be clear, that document that I'm talking about has Vitalik's signature on it.
mm,
So that's incorrect. The second component of it is that it's now become sufficiently decentralized. Well, according to its own documents, it hasn't been. In his depositions, we did an extensive amount of due diligence. You would think if you're the SEC, you would not be calling in Joseph Lubin and Vitalik and saying, "Hey, so tell me what happened." I mean, I didn't get the benefit of that. Nobody said to me, "Say, hey, are you innocent or not?" No, you're not innocent. Okay, good. You can go home. I
mm,
mean, that's what this is not why we have agencies, right? Unless they were just looking to put on the record. But those interviews were transcribed and they were under oath. So they will be released. And so no, at no point did it have any validity.
mm. So let's fast forward to Gensler and what he's doing now. So the reports came out this week that the SEC's doing an investigation into the Ethereum Foundation. They are looking to block that Ethereum ETF. They're looking to categorize ETH as a security. We touched a bit on that, right? The Prometheum strategy and so forth. So, in context of the ETH ETF, do you think this is something to block that ETF and also uh to, like you said, push this tokenization security aspect to Wall Street?
Well, I think it will. I think the ETF, sure, the ETF is always a possibility, but I don't think that's the direction that they're headed in now.
Mm,
I think they realized that that was kind of DOA, dead on arrival. Hopefully my emergence had something to do with that. But they're saying, how do we cover up everything that's happened in the past and still benefit from this control that we have over Ethereum and utilize Ethereum for our own purposes? I think that's the dual new mandate that Gensler has. And keep in mind, Gensler was with the CFTC. He was making comments, a long time ago. He's been talking about this for years, ever before he got to the SEC. He's the one who prosecuted this enforcement action. You
Mm.
know, Hinman and Clayton just dropped it on their way out, like literally. And so, he's not, some people say, well, it didn't start under him. I'm not sure what that means. I mean, he continued it. And in many ways, with the enforcement action, he actually did the whole thing. Um, so it, I'll give him credit because it's, for being insidious. It's a rather clever way of covering up one's sins while still trying to make some use of the asset that they were trying to utilize to monopolize all of crypto. Maybe they won't be monopolize all of crypto, but they
Mm.
may be able to monopolize all of tokenization of real world assets. And for those of you who don't understand, that's like a $4 quadrillion estimated market. The world economy, I don't even think it's 100 trillion, something like that. Four
Mm.
quadrillion is like 4,000 trillion. It's like 40 times the world economy, something in that, somewhere in that neighborhood. It's just orders of magnitude larger. So there's, this massive opportunity. And why are they picking Ethereum? I mean, obviously, there's a control aspect there that they can manage it.
Yeah, and to your point, just this week, and I'm not sure if you saw the news, BlackRock, it was announced with Coinbase and Securitize, they started tokenizing investment funds on the Ethereum blockchain. Um, So to your, I mean, we're seeing it playing out right before our eyes, and ETH is often chosen above many other smart contract platforms that are out there. So to your point, there seems to be a clear bias or agenda. It's the right word there. Um, Now you have a lawsuit. Tell us about that lawsuit and what's going on there.
Yeah, so the lawsuit is actually against the US government, and it's for malicious prosecution. So it's not against Joe and Vitalik per se at this point. Though when we get into discovery, depending on what we find there, they could be added. And that's it's a very hard lawsuit. It's very rare that, a lawsuit like that could come across. It'll be a, record-setting lawsuit. Technically, you have to sue agents, somebody with arrest authority. So we're suing the FBI agents which perjure themselves and falsify documentation in order to pursue my false prosecution. But then the United States steps in for them.
Hmm.
And that should be filed, within a month.
Wow. Um, the other question I wanted to ask you, in context, and there's so many things here, so forgive me if I'm jumping around a bit, but do you feel the SEC or Congress actually will have to pass legislation to update the Howey test to be able to categorize tokens appropriately, given that this is a very different world from the 1930s when the Howey test was put together? You got blockchains distributed globally, some centralized, some decentralized, tokens distributed globally. What is your outlook and how the US is going to treat these things?
So, I mean, I think, updating how it tests is a U.S. Supreme Court decision. So, I guess Congress could overrule it, in a sense, but on the other hand, in 2019, Warren Davidson, and I helped him with this, had the Token Taxonomy Act
Hmm.
and had a safe harbor for utility tokens. You look at jurisdictions like right now in the UAE and Dubai in particular, you want to start an exchange, they give you an application. Here are the things you have to, they make a lot of sense. And here are the things you have to do. You want to issue a utility token. Here are the things you do. You get a license for it, you pay a fee. And, there are very commonsensical ways that have been implemented in many countries across the globe that we are choosing not to because they're working, they're flourishing. You're not finding, the kind of fraud. I'm sure there's always going to be fraud. It's an early industry, right? With every industry there was fraud, right? And certainly less fraud than I think that there is on the governmental side. But you don't necessarily, Clayton said, we don't need to disturb our securities laws. Well, you certainly need to at least clarify them. And I think creating safe harbors for that.
Yeah.
Overturning Howie, for this instance is a possibility. It's just I'm not necessarily sure that's necessary because there are ways in which you can do this. You can say, depending on what you want to do, here are the requirements. You pass those into law, right? And they're kind of this like separate regime, from
Sure.
how, you know, but you can go either way. The point is that they don't want to go either way.
Yeah.
They kill any legislation other than, Elizabeth Warren saying that, Hamas or criminals or whatever, whatever word she just wants. She just throws out whatever organizations you want and says, they use crypto for illicit activities. Wouldn't it be interesting if the government was using crypto for illicit activities? Who knows? It's I would say it's very hypocritical in terms of what they're doing, and they're clearly stalling to have implementing regulations because regulation stops them from doing arbitrary enforcement actions like they did against Ripple. And I think that's what they're looking to do. I think they took advantage of the FTX thing
Yeah.
if they weren't involved in the FTX thing from an early state. And that showed the kind of damage that they could do where regulations would stop them from doing that.
Mm. Now, you're still involved in crypto. You're building a metaverse project. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So, it's interesting. My background is really more in AI, as much as I've created in crypto. And so we have some technology and some seminal patents that we realized would actually lend itself well to creating a digital twin of the Earth. And so it's a certain model that we have. It's going to be introduced shortly. And that would allow you to do things that you just couldn't do today. You could, in real time, you kind of like teleport to the Japanese gardens or the Times Square. And it's intended to allow people to have, immersive, mostly augmented reality experiences where they couldn't otherwise have them. And, you go into a mall and you go, let's say you want to buy a suit or a dress instead of looking like an avatar with an NFT, you actually look like you. It is
Mm.
a representation of you, but it's a digital twin. And so you're probably going to want to look sharp the way you look now. And you're not going to look like Daffy Duck on a spaceship, right? And it'll be familiar. And we happen to have had built this all out for a smart city project that we were doing, which we'll still be doing as part of this. But we believe that the real metaverse is the one where you're going to look like yourself, you're going to feel like yourself, but you're going to be able to do things quicker, faster, cheaper. So if you want to, instead of us having this conversation right now, you and I could be sitting across the table from each other,
Wow.
and we have our, glasses on. We could be sitting right across from each other, and you look like you, I look like me, right? And it feels like a familiar setting.
Mm.
Be that, we could create a setting, or it could be, the setting that, is in your office. And the commercial potential of this is just really astronomical. I think in 10 years, something like this could be larger than the economy on the planet.
Mm.
So if you want to have, you want to go, let's say the hottest nightclub is in Ibiza. And they have a limit of how many people they can have in there, and we have to respect the laws of physics. So let's say it's 5,000 people. Well, they could create a digital representation, a digital twin of that, and then people from all around the world could go and experience that. And instead of flying there and paying all the expenses and the time and the one, an entire day, to deal with and getting there, you could just put on your glasses and you could be right there right now. Uh,
Right.
so the potential there, I'm giving a really high overview. I think it's going to be a game changer. We own the technology to do that. We have the patents on it, but more importantly, since 2010, we've been actually building out this tech. We didn't realize we were building it out for this purpose. But about 2, 3 years ago, we realized, hey, wait, we will actually have the tech to build a digital twin. And the beauty of it also is that the users, um, without going into all the specifics of how, but it'll be fairly easy for the users to be building it out. A lot of things I see, like, some of these metaverses, most of the metaverses, they're going against the grain of what like made social media, great. And that was user generated content. So the users are going to be building this out. And
Ah,
it'll be really easy for them to do that. Whereas they're building out, a whole world and they're going to have to keep it updated. And that's just not how, and we're really not doing Web 3, we're really jumping into Web 5. It's kind of like what this project's all about. We're leapfrogging it all the way. And to the user generated content, we'll keep this fresh. It'll be content that people want.
right.
If you have a vacation home and a man cave in that vacation home, but you're at regular home, you can film your vacation home. But when you're in your regular home, you can feel like you're sitting in that exact room, and it looks like that exact room. You look like exactly like you, and you can invite 3, 4 of your buddies, and you could have a beer and whatever you want to have. Making an example, but um, it would feel like the real world. You could do things that, are more fantastic, but it's really geared towards creating transactions,
Mm,
and interactions and immersive experiences. And so it's very heavy. While it'll be launched, I will say this, it's probably the most ambitious project that ever been launched on in blockchain. While at the same time, I think this is the first true AI project that's being launched in blockchain. So
wow.
the token will be really, it's very much an AI token, and the technology is probably 70, 80% artificial intelligence.
Can you tell me if you're using a blockchain that's already in the market or you have your own proprietary blockchain?
We're going to be announcing that soon.
Okay, got it. I'm excited to see that,
That's a
man.
good question.
That's
That's a
that's
good
awesome.
question.
Um,
I will say this, I believe that the winning layer 1 blockchain will be the one that has the killer dApp that has economies of scale and network effects and all of that. And I believe that killer dApp is going to be what people are referring to as a metaverse. We're saying it's an immersive experience. So I believe whoever kind of wins this, the blockchain underneath that will be the winning blockchain.
mm. Well, I'm excited to see that, man. That sounds fascinating. And given that your background's in I gotta ask you about the ascension of AI and what we're seeing with OpenAI and ChatGPT and so forth. And then there's talks of AI is going to take away a lot of jobs, but we know many times there's a short period where there's a massive disruption, jobs are lost, but then there's jobs creation. What is your outlook on how AI is going to change the world like in the next 10 years?
So I think it's going to be massive. I would say on a couple of things. I think, the calls that like Elon and some others have had for regulation, they're so worried about blockchain, right? And blockchain, a couple billion, $1 trillion, right? And it doesn't pose the threats that AI, nowhere near the threats that AI poses. So I think, yeah, and I know the White House issued some executive orders on this, but I think that there needs to be more regulation in terms of how it's being built up because it can become very dangerous. Two, I think you're right, it will be disruptive. And what you'll see is, just like the Industrial Revolution and other, um, disruptions, in terms of technologies, what you'll see is, people go upstream.
Mm,
And so right now I could probably use ChatGPT to write a very basic legal contract that I would have to call my lawyer for.
mm,
So now lawyers will be more focused on, planning and strategic analysis, and in fact those things are worth more than putting together a document. So in some ways, you'll have to have more experience. It'll be a little bit harder to compete, but you probably could do even better.
mm,
And then also don't forget that the chat GPT is making the lawyers work lot less, a lot easier, and probably a lot more profitable. So net, I don't think, I use my our Metaverse, and then for those that don't know, it's called Clone, Klone.
mm,
Um, in there, we expect to have more generative AI entities that look like real people.
mm,
Somebody wants to teach you a skill, or somebody, who, you want to go and talk to about some information, but it actually looks like a real person, as opposed to just, getting something from ChatGPT. And arguably there'll be more of those than actual real people in there, but you'll be using those, and those will be generating revenue for the companies that are producing those.
mm,
And there are people that have to, create those generative AI, real looking people. So, that's a whole industry on and of itself that'll be coming out. Because this is a new service that I wasn't able to do before.
mm.
It's coming from many different directions. But when you look at 10 or 20 years from now, aside from the risks that are associated with this, I think it's going to catapult our standard of living, our experience, and the joy that we have in terms of life. And in the end, I think it'll be a lot of concern over nothing, because I think people will have a better standard of living. And for people to remember, standard of living is really about how much leisure time do you have and how
Yeah,
much you need to work,
right.
right? That goes back to our conversations with inflation, the Fed, and all of that. It's a whole separate conversation. But the point is, I think AI has the ability to give us back more leisure time than we've had. Given the Industrial Revolution, and we've had three, four revolution, we should be working a 5-hour week, and we're not. It's gotten worse. But AI has a chance to help, reverse that trend a bit.
Right. Stephen, man, I wish we had more time. We'll have to do round two to talk more, but I got some wrap-up questions here for you. Uh, favorite food?
I'm sorry.
Oh, wrap-up questions for you.
Right, go
Rapid
ahead.
fire. Fa What's your favorite food?
Oh, my favorite food. It's a good question. Deli.
Favorite musician or band?
Favorite musician or band? Um, Tie between Billy Joel and the Stones.
Favorite movie?
Favorite movie? Um, right now I've been watching Ready Player 2 quite a bit.
Mm. And favorite book?
Favorite book? Um, can't say War and Peace. It's really long. Um, believe it or not, it's a good old high school Catcher in the Rye.
Oh yeah. And when you're not doing anything metaverse wise or crypto, what are you doing for fun as a hobby?
Nature, meditation.
Stephen, pleasure chatting with you and thank you for taking the time. Appreciate your insights. And like I said, we'll have to do part two, but thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Tony. Have a wonderful day.